Hello and welcome. My name is Dr. Mary Harrell. I'm a clinical psychologist, a Jungian-oriented psychotherapist. I'm Associate Professor Emeritus at State University of New York in Oswego. And I'm with you today to answer questions about imaginal figures in everyday life, stories from the world between matter and mind, and also to answer questions that my readers have asked. I want to thank my husband, Stephen, who's going to ask the questions on behalf of my readers. And I certainly want to thank Ryan Deegan, who's the producer of this first author chat for Chiron Publications. So thank you, Ryan.
Dr. Harrell, what inspired you to write this book?
Well, it was two situations. The first one occurred many years prior to writing the book when I was 13 years old, and my mother suddenly died. And so I and my family, we were very untethered for some years. I was lost, very sad, of course. We were all grieving. And one night, 2 years after my mother's death, I experienced a being, a presence, who I thought mistakenly was a ghost. Because I was 15 years old, I was so frightened that as I saw this being manifest and begin walking toward me with the gift that she had for me, I utterly panicked, and intuitively I knew that if I could move, I could stop her from manifesting. And I didn't want her to give me the gift that she brought, because that meant there would be a completion between us. And since I was so afraid, I didn't want anything completed. So I somehow left my bed and hugged my sister, Joanne, very tight. So you would think, okay, mission accomplished, the ghost was gone, I was okay. But for 22 years, that figure continued to try to manifest and to give me the box. And for the next 22 years of my life, until I was 37, I developed 100 ways for her not to be able to fully manifest and give me that gift. So that brings me to the second event that resulted in the writing of Imaginal Figures, and that's that years later, when I went to Pacifica Graduate Institute to do my training as a clinical psychologist, I discovered a lens through which I could look at that experience and others. So I understood through the work of Henri Corbin and Hillman and Jung and Romanishin and Veronica Goodchild, I understood that there is a world called the imaginal realm, and it's from that world that figures like my angel come for a very particular purpose. And the purpose is my own growth, my own development. So at that moment in my life, I knew that I wanted to study imagination, and I wanted to study the many different kinds of imaginal figures that live in that realm.
You write about imaginal figures that help you explore life more deeply. Can you explain what an imaginal figure is?
I can. An imaginal figure is a being that's not fully material, but it's not just an idea of the mind. So it's a figure that lives between the physical world and the world of mind. Henri Corbin, a French philosopher, came up with a word to describe this kind of figure, and the word he came up with is imaginal, which is different from imaginary, because imaginary beings are not real, but imaginal beings are. So good examples of imaginal beings would be dream figures, figures from myth and fairy tale, visionary experiences. Jeffrey Raff talks about a guide or an ally, a being who is not part of our psychology, but is sent from psyche nonetheless to help us in our development, or sometimes not sometimes, but always our transformation. Steve, before you go on asking the next question, I would like to read a small passage from the book, because in this passage, I can show how when a figure comes to us, in this case it's going to be a dream figure, that what the figures always want is for us to interact with them. And that means maybe to wonder about them. Sometimes it means to host them, like you would host a guest who comes to your house. So I'm just going to take a minute and read a short paragraph in which a figure came to me, and she was also instrumental in my writing the book. And this is how I wondered about her. I have been moved by classical Japanese dance, wherein reality was of a worldly beauty. Not so the dance and the dancer of this dream. I knew as I watched that her dance transcended that which my material senses had ever perceived. In the dream, it was the bodily gestures within the dance that deepened the experience of the mundus imaginalis. The gesture linking affect and image brought a sense of awe. As I witnessed her dance, I remember knowing that I was in the presence of a figure unlike any other I had encountered before. This girl was on the right of my family who didn't notice her. I wondered if my dream family held the symbology of a larger social order, one that didn't hold her in consciousness. The thought crossed my mind that perhaps this social order could not see her in the dream because it wasn't open to the realm in which she dwelt. A truth expressed in the inability of so many to hold in awareness figures from the mundus imaginalis. And I went on in analyzing the figure, but I'll stop with this example.
How long did it take you to write imaginal figures?
If you count the first time I experienced my figure, it took a lifetime. But I'll talk about the writing of it. It was a 14-year journey. And so it began with the writing down of 7 stories from my life that I knew held mystery and symbology, and I knew there was something deeper than the stories themselves. So I wrote those. And then I studied what scholars have already learned about imaginal figures and about the different dimensions that different figures can open for us into this imaginal realm. And then I wrote what I discovered as I looked at the figures in every story. However, it was so different from anything I had ever done before that I admit, at first, I didn't even fully realize what I was experiencing, what I was seeing. It's so hard to put into words these experiences. So I left the work for several years, and then I started to rewrite, revise, with the intention that it would be so clear to people who were both Jungian-oriented people as well as people who knew nothing about analytical psychology, but they wanted to transform, they wanted to grow, they wanted to find meaning in their life. And so that took more years. And you know what they say about writing: you should write, you should revise, you should edit, you should rewrite, you begin again. And that's what I did until I was satisfied with what was on the page.
Why do you write?
I write because I can't not write. I write like a dancer dances, or a poet creates poetry, or a painter paints. I'm just balanced when I write. And if life gets very demanding and I notice that some weeks have gone by or some months have gone by and I haven't been writing, then I know I'm out of balance and I know I have to get back to the work. And there's always some work in front of me, some passionate thing that I'm trying to accomplish.
How can others discover their own imaginal figures?
Well, to Jungians who might be listening to this author chat. The answer is very familiar. And I'll say this for people who may not be familiar with Jung's work. Carl Jung, early in his life, had an experience in which he wanted to play, and he played with stones. And during that time of his life, he was having great psychological difficulty and great spiritual difficulty. So he would take these stones as he had when he was a little boy, and he played with them. And as he played, to answer the question, how can others be involved with imaginal figures? As he played, fantasies came to him. Ideas came to him. Old memories came to him. Unresolved mysteries came to him, and he continued to build with these stones. So out of that, he discovered this process that we call active imagination. And so if you want to be involved with imaginal figures, you take Jung's words to heart. And he said this: stay with the image until you come to terms with the unconscious. But stay with the image with a self-reflective ego capacity, or rather a self-reflective ego attitude. And so that's what I would recommend to anyone. That means if you have a dream, write the dream down. If you have a very strong intuition that someone else is present, pay attention to that. Don't allow yourself to say, well, there's nobody else in the room. There might be an imaginal figure who's there to help you and guide you. I had an experience right before I gave my I had my oral comprehensive exam at Pacifica, and I woke up the morning of the exam and I was very nervous, and I didn't know if I would pass the exam, and I didn't know what they would ask of me. And I felt the presence of a woman, so I just calmed down and I asked myself, who's here? And there was this beautiful older woman with gray hair. And her hair was curly, and she was barefoot. And she was in a clearing in a wood. And she was so calm and grounded in the earth and grounded in who she was as a woman that I knew that she was there for me and that she could be there for me if I allowed it when I did my oral defense. So I thought to myself, I want to take her with me. And she was an aspect of my own interior self that hadn't been fully realized, kind of an aspect that was full of maturity and wisdom and a confidence about being authentic. So, in a word, pay attention.
What books have most influenced your life?
Well, of course, because I'm a writer, that means I'm a reader, so there are hundreds. But what comes to mind is that in 1965, James Michener wrote a book called The Source. And at that time, I was living in a coal mining town, and I was essentially a little Catholic girl, and I only knew from my experience of life that everybody was a Catholic, with the exception of a couple people who were Protestants. And that's all I knew about the world. Well, I read James Michener's The Source, and it took place at a tell, which is a dig, an archaeological dig. And as the characters doing the dig found different pieces of history of the people that lived there, I learned about the Jewish tradition. And it's this vast and deep and highly spiritual tradition connected to a divine source. And understanding that there's this whole world of another tradition was just so eye-opening for me. It just changed the way I know the world. So that was my first book that always comes to mind because I just thought it was beautiful. Then I also love Richard Tarnas's Passions of the Western Mind, which is a book of philosophy, but it reads like a great, I hope he doesn't mind that I say this, a great soap opera. You just want to know who's going to do this and who's going to do that and what's going to happen next. So I really love that. And I guess the third book I want to mention is The Pregnant Virgin by Marion Woodman. And that book is about a woman moving into her authentic self. It's about psychological development. And she talks about a time when a woman is in a chrysalis and she knows that her entire life will never be the same again. And her job is to break out of that chrysalis. So that would be my third most favorite book.
Why do you use stories to explore imagination?
Well, I had said earlier that Jung tells us to stay with the image with a self-reflective attitude. And stories are full of images. So because I'm a writer and not a painter, I'm a writer and not a dancer, the image that I study and that I look at is found in my stories. I'd like to give a great example, at least I think it's a beautiful example, of image showing itself in a story. I'm going to read a paragraph in which a red-tailed hawk shows up in the story, and he became an entrance into a dimension of divine reality as the story goes on. But I'm just going to read the part where my reader and I get to see this hawk and start getting a sense about what's going on. The night before, I had made a serious error with my daughter's cat. I was cat sitting, and I was rushing to the vet's office. It was a Sunday morning, and the cat was very ill. And on my way to the vet's office, I saw a red-tailed hawk in the middle of the road on the other side, not the side my car was on, but the other side. And I passed him quickly, and I was so surprised that he didn't fly away. It looked like he was eating a little rabbit. So the story opens when I'm coming back from the vet's office, and the cat's with the vet, and here we are. 1 hour later, as I returned from the veterinarian's office, relieved that the cat had not died and that a competent and caring vet was ministering to her, I was surprised to find the hawk in the same spot on Arroyo Road. I was struck, too, that his proud, still attitude had not shifted in the hour since we first encountered each other. Pulling off the road, I rolled down my window, as if to ask a fellow traveler if I might help. The hawk, so very large at this close distance, his chest held high, simply lifted his eyes and looked into mine with the clearest intention, meeting my gaze like a king. His expression, like none other I had seen before, allowed both of us to flow into the soul of the other. In that magical moment, there was no difference between human and animal, except that he was somewhat above me on an unseen hierarchy, as he presented himself for help. Although this connection lasted for seconds, at the same time, it felt like an eternity.
What are some of the key ideas that you hope every reader will be left with?
Well, the big idea is this: live life imaginatively. Throw out the notion that we all got from the Age of Enlightenment. And the notion is, if something cannot be verified by science and reason, it is not legitimate. Throw that out. Because before the Age of Enlightenment, we had a broader sense of what reality was. And so if you experience something as real, you've had an experience that you should acknowledge, that you should wonder about, maybe write about it, dance about it, build with stones about it. But when you have these experiences, know that they are sent by Psyche for your growth and your development, your transformation. I think I'll just let it go with that.
What most surprised you as you wrote about imagination and imaginal figures?
To study imagination means that you are looking for some sort of illumination. You're looking at a mystery very often, and you're trying to figure out, why is this happening? Why did this angel come to me for 22 years? Why did this hawk look at me like he did? What was happening between us? And so one of the stories that I inquired about came from my 30 years as a teacher before I became a psychologist. And so from 1996 until the present, there's been this awful phenomenon of school shootings. And all of us in education, all of us who are parents, all of us who are soulful people, experience this constriction of soul. There's always this fear of when is it going to happen next. But more importantly, we wonder, what's going on? So one of my stories was about the school shootings. And because I'm an imaginal psychologist, I chose to look at this phenomenon as if it is a cultural dream, because it is a dream of the culture. It's an unconscious manifestation of something that's going on culturally. And when I did, I was so surprised to find that in exploring that dream, there were answers that emerged. There were 5 of them, and they are very beautiful answers. I want every teacher, every parent, everybody who is tired of the media telling us that this is because of evil boy shooters. Every time the media narrows down the argument to a gun issue, which the guns are a huge part of the problem, but nonetheless, it's not the only part. I want all of those people to read the section in the book called A Nation Dreams Its Violence, because in that section, Psyche has told us what's going on and has told us what the solution is. And Psyche doesn't always give us solutions. Sometimes it just wants us to look at the image with respect and wondering. But this time Psyche said, I have the answer. That was the big surprise of the book.
It's been said that you write with a poetic sensibility. How is that a good thing for a psychologist who is explaining the human condition?
Well, psychology is a very new science. And as it emerged in the field, I think there was this self-conscious attitude as psychology developed, and this wish that it be regarded as a science. Well, the human condition is much more complex than a science that can be looked at objectively. So I do agree that there are quantitative parts of being a human. There's quantitative dimensions to human brain chemistry, for instance. But being a human being is also very complex. And I prefer to look at the human condition with the sensibility of a poet, because the minute you do that, you have immersed yourself into psychology as a project of the humanities. So all of a sudden, you're not looking at human beings through a rigid lens. You're not even looking at humanity through an objective lens. Now you're looking subjectively. And now you're able to see that neither nor quality of being a human being. All of us are neither heroes nor villains. All of us have the capacity really to harm others. We have the capacity to murder. We have the capacity to be the gambler or the abuser. But it's only when we look at that capacity within us that we can moderate it, transform it, contain it, and not live out of that place. So to look at my stories, for instance, with a poetic sensibility, all of a sudden a broader world of reality and truth opened up for me. And I think it's a better fit with the content of imagination anyway. It did make the book harder to write, though, because when you're speaking like a poet, you can't afford to not be clear. You still have to bring clarity to the discussion, even though there are times when you have to use image, use poetic language. Thank you for asking that question. I love that question. And I want to add that Robert Romanishin, when he wrote the foreword to my book, he was the first one who said that I write with a poetic sensibility. And I've never been more proud or honored to have someone describe my work in any way than that way. It was really wonderful. I hadn't thought about it that way myself.
What writing project are you currently working on?
Well, I'm doing a young adult fiction project right now. And what's going on is that we started this whole conversation with me telling you about a figure who came to me when I was 15. And I really was afraid of her, and I ran away from her for 22 years. And I do now know why she came. And I know what she wanted to say, and I know what she wanted to bring me, because I did the work in the book. But in my young adult novel, what I've done is I've written a story about a 15-year-old girl to whom an angel visits. But because it's a fiction, she isn't afraid. She moves right into relationship with her angel. And my reader hears what she and the angel talk about. And it's really quite beautiful. It's my hope that young people who are suffering, as I was, from the time I was 13 until I fully matured as a woman, I wish I had had a book such as the one that I'm writing. So it's my wish that this can be a healing book, and it's also a book of imagination, but I'm just not framing it that way. What I love the most about the book is that the voice of this 13-year-old girl who lost her mother, and then the 15-year-old girl who hosted an angel, is so authentic and so sweet and so pure, and I can't believe that it's there deep inside of me and comes out so easily if I sit down in front of my computer and just start telling another piece of her story.
Well, that concludes the list of questions that I have, Dr. Harrell. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you for asking them. And again, thank you to Chiron Publications for allowing me to do the first author chat. Mary Harrell, signing off.